representative District 67. He is in his last 2 years. He's begun his the first part of his session, his final session. He has one more session after this, and he'll report on his work that he was engaged in at the annual session and his committee work. And Ed was in, I think, one of the most important the most important of the subcommittees involving finance and transportation. And so I'd like to invite him at this time to come up and speak to us. And we're always happy to have him here. Please give him a warm welcome.
I don't have a good voice as Irwin, so I'll stand closer, and that way I don't get hoarse trying to project out to you. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. It is summertime. Otherwise, we'd have every table full, and everybody's enjoying their summer, their trips, their vacations. Lee and I just got back from a wonderful Alaskan cruise, which we have never been there before. And I know the president was in California, but it's good to be home. He's right, it's good to be home. The 2013 legislative session ended on May the 5th of 2013 after 60 days. And as Irwin alluded to, this being my senior term, termed out, we have 8-year term limits. Being a senior, I was starting to believe that I would never have a session where we had enough money to do the core business of our state, because every year we were having to cut $3 and $4 billion out of our budget, and government should not spend money they do not have. I'm a firm believer of that, and in this state we are bound by the Constitution that you can only have a balanced budget. If you don't have the money, you can't spend it. There's another government in a District of Columbia that I think would be nice if they would adopt that same policy. But to date, they have not. So let me just sort of take a few moments and go over some of the important items that occurred during this legislative session. We have a wonderful speaker in Will Weatherford that is a Pasco County resident and an incredible young man. He's 34 years old, 35 years old. He's not very old, but he's wise beyond his years. And I was proud to support him as our leader out of my freshman class. And now he's the speaker. And Speaker Weatherford was very kind to me. He appointed me when we were doing committee assignments, and the speaker actually controls which committees you are going to sit on and where you sit in the House floor and where you park your car. And so he's a big deal. And Speaker Weatherford was kind enough to appoint me to 7 committees, and he permitted me to chair the committee in the House on Transportation and Economic Development. And folks, we have a total budget in this state of $74.1 billion. And the Transportation and Economic Development budget is not the biggest; it's the 3rd biggest, but it's almost $11 billion to meet the transportation needs throughout our state. And when I say transportation today, that means roads, bridges, airports, seaports, railroads, and widening of all of our ports that we are now trying to do to accommodate the reopening of the new Panama Canal with the supersized barges that will be coming to our shores starting in 2014. If we're not ready for that, commerce will pass us by and go to the deep ports, and Florida will be dealt a serious blow. And the other part of that budget is for economic development, and that's what the governor is using today as he travels around the world, encouraging people to come, move your business here, expand your business here. Let us help you hire more folks. We want to grow your business. We want you to be successful. If you're a businessman, you ought to live in the state of Florida. We have no income tax. We have perfect weather. We have perfect opportunity. We're positioned geographically in an area where we can, with the new canal opening, we can import and export all over the world. And the governor is very serious about creating jobs. He works every day out selling Florida to corporations and companies here and abroad. So I think that's an important thing. Another important committee that I was privileged to be on is the Ethics and Elections Committee, which had a huge session with campaign finance reform and ethics reform. And I'll touch on that briefly in just a moment. My other committees were the Economic Affairs Committee, the Rules and Calendar Committee, the Full Appropriations Committee. That's the committee that sets the final budget for the House and does the conference with our Senate partners. The Transportation and Highway Safety Policy Committee, and I think I got them all, did I not? Okay. That keeps you fairly busy, and that's okay. You know, there are a lot of people think that if you're in the Florida House and Florida Senate, you only spend 60 days a year in Tallahassee during session. Well, I can tell you that on September 23rd, I'll be back in Tallahassee this coming year. Our committee weeks start in September, and we'll be in meetings in September, October, November, December, January, 3 weeks in February, and then session will start the first Tuesday in March again. So you're in Tallahassee parts of 6 months out of the year and about 3 months nonstop. Because when session starts, those days, 60 days, count Saturdays and Sundays, and the only break we get is we do take an Easter break on Passover Friday and Easter Sunday proper. So we usually take a 3-day break over the Easter holidays. But otherwise, it's 60 straight days, and a lot of those days on Saturdays and Sundays, you're at the Capitol. Especially when it's budget time, you might be there. Typical day would be get to the Capitol about 7 in the morning, and there have been times where you're still at the Capitol at midnight, or 1 o'clock in the morning, or 2 o'clock in the morning, because you have to get that budget finalized. The state constitution has one requirement: the legislature must pass a balanced budget. That's all we have to do. If we don't pass another bill, it's okay. But we pass a few. Every year, we have about 2,100 bills that are filed for every session. Each member can file a predetermined number of bills on anything they want to talk about. There are people in the other party that every year file bills to legalize marijuana, to allow mixed marriage, to give equal rights to alternative lifestyles. Everything under the sun you can imagine is filed every year. Most of those never get the first committee hearing, thankfully. But if 2,100 bills are filed, a typical legislative session has 200 bills passing. So 90% of every bill that's filed dies. And if I file a bill, I'll have to go find a senator that will also file that same bill, because it must have a sponsor in each body, and they must pass each side, the Senate and the House, before it is sent to the governor for his approval or veto. And the governor still has some bills today. He is not finished. He still has till July the 3rd is the last day he can veto any bills that are in his possession. Otherwise, they become law whether he signs them or not. So, it's an interesting process. And it's a process where, luckily in Tallahassee, the Republican Party has the majority in the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion. That is so important, and we're losing ground. And every year now, the Democratic Party are picking up seats, picking off seats. Next year, the gubernatorial election is going to be incredibly important to this state. Folks, Governor Scott could lose the governorship race, and we could have a Democratic governor, which would change the way this state operates incredibly soon. I mean, that governor would have the ability to take away the good, proper business perspective that we're trying to do, to grow this economy, to make this a safe state, and to offer the core services that are important to you and to me and all of us. And now we are, within 2 years, We're over 19 million now. We will soon be the third largest state in the nation. We're going to pass New York in the next 2 years. We're almost deadlocked now. And I'll give you an example of how we do business and how it's still done up north. As I said, we have a $74 billion budget for roughly 20 million citizens. New York has 20 million citizens, and their budget is exactly double ours, 146 billion. Somebody has to pay that freight. And you know how it's done up there. You pay taxes on everything. City, county, state, income, every sales, every tax that is humanly possible. That's the only way you can generate that kind of revenue to fund what they choose to fund. So we're blessed in this state. We have to play with what we have. And so let's talk about ethics in elections. That was a huge, all of you that voted last year may or may not have stood in line, but you all saw the horror stories of people who take extra postage to mail your ballot in because we messed up. The legislature messed up and put lengthy wordage and had too many pages, and voters get fatigued. You're not going to stand at that voting booth for an hour reading every item. So we fixed that. We fixed it to where we are now bound by the same wordage that you are, 75 words or less, on any constitutional amendment or ballot initiative. That's fair. We should not have any ability to have more than a citizen-driven initiative. We also changed the way that we do our registration, we do our ballot, we do our provisional ballot, we do our early voting hours. We heard over and over and over again, the supervisors in all 67 counties want to have the flexibility that serves their county. And there are counties in the Panhandle that don't need 14 days of early voting and 20 early voting sites. They can get it done in 6 hours and 2 sites because nobody lives there. So we gave the supervisors the flexibility that they asked for. They can have a minimum of 8 days of early voting and a maximum of 14. They get to pick. We also changed the flexibility to give them the ability to have early voting sites before it was at the supervisor's office or at a government building like a city hall or public library. Well, it's not fair for voters in the supervisor's office to come into a library scenario and disrupt their way of business. So we expanded the opportunities that they could place their early voting sites. So I think the next election cycle will be much smoother, much more well-run, and the changes that were made. And I'll tell you that in the Senate, the chairman of that Ethics and Elections Committee was Senator Latvala from this county. And he did a wonderful job in chairing and fostering that legislation through the process. And a young man from, well, he's not that young, but in the House side, our chair was by Representative Jim Boyd from Manatee County, bright guy who did an incredible job. He and Senator Latvala did very well in changing that part of what will be a smooth election cycle. We also changed the way that we are held ethically when somebody files a complaint or when the Ethics Commission, which had no authority, no teeth, they could not initiate a complaint. You, a citizen, could file a complaint and they would address that, but they had no ability to initiate a complaint or an investigation. They had no ability to collect unpaid fines. They could tell you owed $2,000. They had no way to collect it. And in 3 years, the slate was wiped clean. That's not fair. If I violate the election law or I violate any part of the Constitution and I'm found guilty of that, there should be repercussions. So we have given the Ethics Commission some teeth. And part of that now gives them 20 years to collect that fine. They have the ability to garnish your wages to collect that fine. and you are more apt to be removed from office for violating, whether it's a residency requirement. Every year we have someone in Tallahassee who is determined they don't really live in the district they represent. Well, that's kind of a requirement. In Congress, you don't have to. You can live anywhere in the state of Florida and be a congressman in this state. It's okay. But in state legislature, you must reside in the district that you represent. And occasionally somebody tests that. And before there was no real repercussions. We find them how many days they did live in the district, their salary, but we couldn't make them pay. Well, now that there is repercussions and up to removal from office for that violation. Those are big changes. People everywhere don't trust their government. That's sad. This is the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And when you can't trust your own government to do what's right, that is a sad state of affairs. I think we have to turn that around and get back to that initiative to do that. Now, the two biggest areas of our budget, I told you my transportation was third. Health and Human Services, out of $74 billion, takes $22 billion. I'm sorry, it's more than that. It's on sheet, so I don't give you the wrong number. It's $32 billion. 40% of our entire budget, it's almost $32 billion, is spent on Health and Human Services. Now that's a broad spectrum. That's Medicaid, which is the $22 billion number I was trying to say. Out of our $32 billion that we serve for all the state for health and human services, $22 billion of that is directly tied to Medicaid. That's what it costs the state for Medicaid. And then the other $10 billion is available for every other piece of the health departments, of the veterans nursing homes, to nursing home diversion for our senior citizens, and everything else we do to offer health and human services. So that is the biggest chunk. The second biggest chunk of our budget, over $20 billion, goes to education. The Constitution says we must offer a quality free education in this state. We're doing better at that. When I got elected in 2006 and my first session in 2007, Florida schools were ranked about 47th in the nation in test score results, student achievement. We couldn't find, and one of the biggest things potential employers griped about was, if I move to Florida, there is not a qualified workforce for me to hire. And in that short time, from 2007 till today, we are ranked in the top 10. We have put the money where our mouth is to say we want a quality K-12 education, and then we want to continue that and have a quality higher education system. We have put the money back that we took out of education and exceeded that. We have raised our per student funding. We have given back the money that we took away from our state universities and our state colleges. And we now are poised to have an extraordinary education system that in some areas is going to be world class, not just U.S. class, but world class. The folks in Tallahassee are serious about our kids getting a quality education. Because folks, if your kid goes to school here and goes to college here, we want it to stay here. We don't want it to move to Silicon Valley or to Washington State for Microsoft and move away from us and have our grandkids and we never get to see them again. So we're serious about the education system in this state being capable of producing a workforce. One of the best things we did this year in the K-12, in the high school arena, before this year, there was one high school diploma. And about 20 years ago, somebody made the decision, every kid in Florida is going to go to college. So we're going to have a college-driven high school curriculum that will help these kids be ready to go to college. Well, guess what? Every kid is not going to college. And some of us are old, me included, are old enough to remember way back when we had things like DE in high school that would allow you to learn a trade while you're earning your high school diploma. We're going back to that. We're going to have a dual high school diploma. They're both going to be real high school diplomas, no GED, no A+ and A. They're high school diplomas, but if you have decided with your family that you choose not to or cannot afford to go to college, you're going to be able to earn that high school diploma and come out of high school as a certified licensed apprentice in a variety of occupations that you otherwise would have to get out of school, go serve your apprenticeship for 4 or 5 years, and then try to make a living wage. We want you to be able to do that when school's out. So I think that is big in this state to give, and I think that will cut down on high school dropout ratio. I mean, it's going to keep some kids in school now that are really learning a manufacturing trade, a skilled trade, whether it be plumbing. The colleges are even creating. St. Pete College on Clearwater has a lab now that has a world-class manufacturing technology center in it, and they're teaching people every day and every night and every weekend how to perform in a 21st century manufacturing scenario, because you have to know how to work a computer to be in a manufacturing business. So there's great things going on, and I think that will come down to be probably the biggest thing to the K-12 agenda that will be in my time in the legislature. Other than that, we also fund, after transportation, we fund the courts and the criminal justice system, prisons, judges, courthouses. We do all of that. We spend about $3.8 billion a year in the agriculture world. Agriculture is a big deal in this state, and natural resources. We're back to buying up some sensitive lands to keep for all Floridians to enjoy and not be developed or sold off. And lastly, the smallest part of our budget funds the state government operations. That's all the state agencies that have to, and we have departments all, and in this county we have some state buildings, but in Tallahassee there's a lot of state buildings. So we have to keep those up and keep them operating and keep them painted and the AC working. And so you add all that up, and we put a few dollars in reserve for the rainy day, which is always good, and that equals $74.1 billion of our hard-earned money, and a lot of those tourists that help us come up with that money. And in case you don't know, we don't get 1 nickel of your property tax. The state lives on a state sales tax, 6%, and out of that 6%, we rebate 1/2 of 1% back to the counties where it was collected. And then in this county, we have an additional 1 cent sales tax that this county keeps and sent from Tallahassee back here. So we live on sales tax 5.5%. We live on corporate income tax, and we live on documentary stamps revenue. That, along with our federal matches and our trust fund revenue, that's what the state government is funded with. We don't get any part of the tax money you send Diane Nelson. That's for the counties and cities to fund their operations. So that's a snapshot of what happens not only this year, but typically every year in Tallahassee. And the 60 days starts out kind of slow, and the last 3 weeks is like a sprint. It is a madhouse to get to the end, and people still call it the 60 scariest days of the year. Sometimes it's an appropriate analogy, and but I'll close with this, and I'll be glad to take any of your questions. I'll be going into my last year. I want you to know that the first day I went to Tallahassee, I was humbled by the opportunity to represent 150,000 residents of this state. And on the last day that I'm in Tallahassee and sitting in that chamber, I'll still be humbled by the opportunity to represent 156,000 now residents of this state. It's a privilege that only 120 people at a time can ever do. 40 in the Senate, 120 in the House. I never take that lightly. There are times when you have to make tough votes, tough decisions based on what you find out, what you hear. Every bill that's filed in the legislature is usually assigned 3, 4, or 5 committee stops. So they get vetted very well in that process before they ever come up for a floor vote. So it's important, and I just want to tell you that thank you for the opportunity you've given me, and I will never forget what will turn out to be, other than marrying my beautiful wife and having my kids born, the 8 most incredible years that I could ever hope for, and I've enjoyed every one of them. So thank you for the privilege you've given me.
It's not a question, but perhaps maybe an omission that you'd like to talk about. I believe you did increase the rainy day fund. You found funds to be able to do that again. I just want to, not lengthen it, but something worthy to talk about, I think.
We put a couple of $1 billion into our rainy. I think we're up to like almost $4 billion for that day that should a hurricane hit this state and cause mass devastation. You know, Citizens doesn't have enough money to cover every property in this state. They have a lot. They have about $9 billion in cash. That's a pretty substantial storm, but the state does have a rainy day reserve. Should there be a shortfall in revenues down the road, or there should be a devastation that requires immediate attention, so we don't have to go out into the market and try to borrow money and delay. We have money in the bank to offset that emergency should it arise. Thank you for that, Irv. I did overlook that.
Thank you. You gave a very extensive presentation. I wish there were more people here to hear the amount of work that you and the legislature have done. But thanks to our friend here,
we're documented by size,
and that has documented this through the miracle of videography, and it can be disseminated to the many. Thank you again, Representative. As always, it's always great to hear from the representative. He alluded to the idea that. As you know, the Panama Canal is being dredged for super-type cargo ships and tankers that would not be able to cross